Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to the Sounds of Film. And we are joined on the program today by Pete Davis. Pete is a writer and civic advocate and a former student of Robert Putnam's. He's the author of Dedicated: The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing and the co founder of the Democracy Policy Network, a policy organization focused on raising up ideas that deepen democracy. He's also the co director of a film, Join or Die, which is playing at the Port Jefferson Documentary Film Series on Thursday, September 27th at 7 p.m. Now, Join or Die is a film about why you should join a club and why the fate of America depends on it. You can follow the story of America's civic unraveling through the journey of Robert Putnam, whose legendary Bowling Alone research into American community decline may hold the answers to our democracy's present crisis. Pete, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Sounds of Film.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, so I mentioned um, Robert Putnam and his famous writing, but some of our listeners may not know who he is. They will if they watch your film, but can you just give our listeners just a little intro to his work?
Yeah, so Robert Putnam's probably most famous outside of academic circles for this book he wrote in 2000 called Bowling Alone. And Bowling Alone, which is subtitled uh, The Decline and Rise of American Community, is all about how over the last 50 years, there's been a huge decline in the amount of ordinary community connections, neighbor to neighbor social connections that we have in our country. And secondly, that decline is really significant for our democracy, for our health, for our economy, for societal flourishing. And so he's tracked, everyone kind of has this sense sometimes that things were different a long time ago. There's kind of this critique of these types of messages that this is just nostalgia for the good old days. But Bob Putnam was able to show through dozens and dozens of graphs and survey data and all this different data he is able to find that we actually seriously have had a decline over the last 50 years in the amount of people that are part of clubs, the amount of people that are part of organizations, the amount of people that are part of congregations, unions, even informal ways of connecting, like picnics and having friends over the house. And so he's kind of ever since writing that book, he's been barnstorming the country trying to get people to see through this lens of community connection and raise the alarm about how this is really significant and how we can turn it around.
Why is it significant to be in a group of some sort or a club?
Yeah, it's very significant on an individual and on a societal level. Let's start on a societal level. The amount of social connectivity among a people, like in a community or in a country or in a state, is correlated with how well the government functions. It's correlated with public health outcomes. It's correlated with economic growth and economic equality and opportunity. On an individual level, it's exactly the same, except on an individual level. If you're more connected with other people, it has positive impacts on your health. Your chances of dying over the last month, over the last year, are cut in half by joining one group. So in fact, quitting smoking is roughly equivalent in terms of health effects as joining an organization. That's how important joining is to our health, but also to our happiness, to our economic well-being, to the amount of agency we feel in our ability to kind of have an impact on our world. That's all connected to community connections. So for our whole country and for ourselves, it's really important we start becoming joiners.
I can understand, I think a lot of people can, that for an individual, joining a group would be good for their mental health because they're connecting with other people, doing like minded things. But can you just explain a little bit more about how, if lots of different people are in different groups, how that can somehow make the government function better
Yeah,
and
yeah,
society work
great.
better? I just don't see the obvious connection, although you do explain
Yeah,
it
so
in the
let's
movie.
get into it. Yeah, because I bet many smart listeners out there are saying, well, causation does not equal correlation. Just because you found that two factors rise and fall together doesn't mean they're connected. So let's get into the what social scientists would call the causal mechanisms of how this works. So, one way it works is general social trust. So when more people are in relationship with each other, they trust each other more, and that trust serves as a lubricant to good things in society. So one is that, ideas spread faster when more people know each other and trust each other. So if you have a good idea for how this town could change, it's going to spread when you're part of more groups and have more social connections. Two is that because you trust each other, you're not spending all this money and effort on the types of stuff we need when we're in a low trust society. So you need less cops, less lawyers, less people checking up on people because more people are working through their relationships. The third is that you make institutions more trustworthy by having a lot of civic engagement because more people are watchdogging the government institutions. If no one's engaging with public life or engaging with each other, the mayor can go on doing what he or she is doing without anyone watching. If you have a really engaged populace, they can't get away with things. They can't get away with literal corruption, being paid to do something bad, but even they can't get away with lethargy, like when the schools are not working in a high trust, high engaged town, the parents get mad and they make it go better. And then finally, when you have this set of relationships and engagement, more people kind of have into how, you know, public life works. So it's not just that. Here's an example of buy-in. It's not just that the best idea of how to collect trash in trash bins in the public park is spread because of the groups. It's not just that the trash bin company that's hired is not hired corruptly because there is watchdogging. It's also that people want to throw their trash away in the public trash bins because they feel part of this. They feel a sense of co-creation and belonging in it. So you have less corruption, you have more ideas spreading, and you have more buy-in into how public life works. And you can see that even in, data that shows people don't want to flick people off on the road in high community engagement regions. That's how specific it gets. People are more happy to pay their taxes and not, lie on their taxes when there's more community engagement. So all these wonderful things happen when you have higher, what Bob calls social capital, ordinary neighbor to neighbor interactions and connections.
It's not the major point of the movie, but there are little flashes of some of the current turmoil in the country, the divisiveness, I guess politically that's going on right now. Um, why, though, as someone who hasn't studied this the way you have, why, though, is it not true that if people are engaged, let's say, in groups on the left and on the right separately, um, and they're very much like involved in those groups, why then doesn't that translate to a better society? Why is it making things more divisive at the moment? Do you have any theories about that?
So if I'm getting the question right, it cut off a bit in the middle. Is it that why are there some groups and ideologies that are part of groups, but things aren't getting better?
Exactly.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, so this is what you find usually is that when you investigate and examine like this idea that, oh, people are part of all these political groups and it's making them extreme, what you'll often find is two possibilities. One is that they're actually not part of these groups. Those groups aren't meeting in person every month in a local area. When they say they're part of a group, what they mean is they subscribe to the same podcasts and watch the same YouTube influencers. And they
Uh,
say, I'm part of this group. I'm part of QAnon. I'm part of, the Proud Boys or something like that. And they're not meeting in person. And meeting in person in real world groups where you have to get to know real people, not just what could be called parasocial interactions with online influencers, you have a moderating tendency by the reality of being in in-person groups, and you have an extremism tendency when it's just an online following that's not a group. The second is there are evil, dark groups that meet in person. The Klan is an example of a club. We admit that in the movie. The chapters of extremist groups. What that problem is often when you have a low social capital era or a location where there's not many community groups, if you're part of one, that one group, since it's your only source of community, can have an extremism effect on you because, oh my gosh, I was desperate for community and this group knocked on my door, they gave me community, and now I'll do anything for them or believe anything for them because they were my first taste of community. In a high social capital place or high social capital time, you are part of multiple groups. And those multiple groups, in addition to being in person, which itself is moderating, when you're part of multiple groups and you know all your neighbors, you get the experience of seeing a bunch of different perspectives, a bunch of different ideas, and no one group can push you to the extremes or make you forget the other things you're part of. And so I think what we need to be doing is we're going to see a lot of symptoms of our low trust, low social capital, low community engagement era, where actually group life gets worse when it's the only thing. But if we can have a broad-based increase in group life, it not only fights those tendencies, but also leads to all these other good things as well.
I notice you keep on saying in person. You mean it's not enough if you're just part of a Facebook group or if you're on LinkedIn with a bunch of different people? That's not good enough?
You know, I don't think in person is the definitive aspect of what makes something communal or like fit the bill of these types of groups that have these good um, consequences to them. But I do think it is more likely than not that it will result in the thing that you actually want. And what is the thing that you actually want? The thing that you actually want are real relationships, relationships where you know a real person as an individual, a personal relationship. You them over the long haul. They're not just there when they entertain you or when their random post passes through your feed. You're knowing them on a routine basis. You're getting to know all the aspects of them. You're not just knowing the person that they present to the world online, but you know multiple aspects of them, and you're willing to bring each other soup when you're sick. You're willing to check each other when
Hmm.
you're wayward. You're willing to celebrate each other when good things happen. Um, that can happen online. There are beautiful examples of people who met on some online board, then they got to know each other. Maybe they Zoom a lot and they live in different places. And so you can have that. But the vast majority of online quote unquote relationships or followings or alleged communities are not getting that in depth community connection. And the vast majority of in person communities are. And so we really want to push towards real relationships that have a pull on each other.
This show is The Sounds of Film, and one of the movies we always end up talking about near the end of the year that I always rewatch is It's a Wonderful Life. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the film, but I just kept on thinking about that movie as I was watching this film. Um, are you familiar with It's a Wonderful Life and how it might connect to some of the ideas in this film? And then,
Totally. Well, and I'm right to think It's a Wonderful Life came out in the 40s, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have to check the date. I don't want to say the wrong date.
yeah, it's such a great example of, in that area of time, even in the 30s, 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s. We were in, according to Bob's data, and as people who remember this time, culturally can attest to, we were in a time of what Bob calls a community upswing. More and more people caring about increasing community in America. There was kind of a culture of small towns and urban neighborhoods. There were a bunch of these organizations gaining membership. There was a cultural milieu in Hollywood around stories about people coming together, not stories about people breaking away from the pact and kind of emphasizing their individualism. And again, this isn't good or bad. It's just communal versus individual with consequences to each. And so it is no surprise that It's a Wonderful Life, with its very communitarian message, came out in a time when societally we were on an upswing in kind of a communitarian social structure.
That's interesting. I've been involved in education my whole life. I was a teacher, and I, particularly in recent years, I don't know if it was a result of some of the work that you're talking about in this film that's been done in the studies, but we were really, really encouraged to get students into groups, to get them to join clubs. And I didn't know all the research behind it, um, but there was a real, like, from the top down kind of push to get everybody involved. And I have to be honest, like, now seeing the statistics, I know I'm not unique. People now these days, it's hard for people to be in groups and in clubs. And the trend, as you mentioned, it's really going in the other direction. And I have to admit, even myself, when I go to professional development kinds of things, and they're making us get into groups, I think I'm not alone where I feel this resistance to it, and I never knew exactly why. Um, and I can see in the movie that it probably is a good thing, and I did try to encourage it with my students, and yet I knew that it did make a lot of them feel uncomfortable. A lot of them didn't want to do it. I don't want to do it sometimes, if I'm completely honest. Um, why are some of us feeling that?
Yeah, so you're not alone in that feeling. That's a feeling I've had. That's a feeling my sister, who I made this film with, Rebecca Davis, also has. Sometimes, there's this tension inside of us, which I think is the tension between community and individualism. We all have this individualist feeling inside of us, which is, we feel oppressed by groups, we feel bored by groups, we feel like a group doesn't fully fit who we are. And the time when we feel most, the only way we can kind of, affirm ourselves or get what we need is when we break away from a group. But then there's another part of us, that's the communal side of us, that can see that, a sense of belonging feels really good. That when you do things together, in community, things get better. That there are some ways that our individual desires cannot be fulfilled individually. There are certain things that we want done or we want to be part of that we can't do alone. And in fact, the ultimate merger of these two is that we discover that the only way to build up who we are is through community. That often we discover our personality or who we become or the individual that we want to be, not alone, but together. And so it's not a question of individual bad, community good. It's a question of balance. When we're too communal and there's no room for individuality, that's when you feel oppression. That's when you feel the kind of terror of conformity. When we're too individualist and there's not enough community, that's when we feel like there's all this stuff we can't get done because we're not communal. That's when we feel like we don't have a sense of belonging. That's when we feel kind of a sense of what some have called like ennui, which
Mm.
is like kind of loneliness in the world. And so we have to find that balance. And we did this movie because we think, not because community is always good and individualism is always bad. It's just that I feel like we're in uh, hyper individualist time
Yeah.
that might need to learn again about community to find that balance.
Well, filmmaking question. The one job that's usually done by a single person is film director, but not in this case. You co-directed this movie. Tell me
Yep.
about that. That's not that it's unheard of, but it is unusual for this
Yeah,
field.
it's funny. It is unusual to have co-directors. And actually, we used to think it was weird that we were a sibling directing team. But then it hit us that usually when there are co-directors, the only way to make it work, you have the case of like the Daniels,
Yeah.
who are not siblings, but outside of them, I almost think almost all duo film directors are related. So the Coen brothers, the Wachowski sisters, Ken Burns works with his family a lot.
Yeah.
What are some other the classic ones? And we I think there's something to that, which is to be able to have that unified vision and handle having someone else in the decision making chair with you requires an almost blood relative level of connection beforehand to make it work through all the tensions of co-directing.
What a big deal that you were a former student of Robert Putnam, and now you made a movie about him. What a journey! Tell me a little bit about your personal
Totally.
connection.
In some ways, that was the goal of the movie, which is that the people that took Bob's class, myself included, almost all of them have had this kind of light bulb moment by taking his class. It's like a before and after for so many of us. You see the world one way, you take Bob's class, and you see the world a different way and want to engage in the world a different way. And so many people have gone on from Bob's class to start community building organizations or go into government and work on community building policies and things like that. And so our goal with the movie was to open up Bob's class to more people in more ways and kind of bring it up to a modern story and make it kind of a visual cinematic story. And so my memories of what delighted me and opened my eyes in Bob's class, we tried to bake in that spirit into the film.
That's fantastic, and I understand. With the Port Jefferson documentary film screening, different groups are coming to the screening and encouraging people to learn about their organizations and sign up and join. Is this something that's being done in multiple screenings all over the country?
Totally. We really want the movie to be an organizing tool for people to use showing the movie as a way to build community themselves. So the movie's about community, everyone can come and learn about community, but in coming together in person to see the film, you're building community and living up to the mission of the movie. So we're so happy they're doing that in Port Jefferson. And if any one of your listeners wants to do it in your neck of the woods, you can head over to host.joinorDie.film and fill out a form to get a community screening in your neck of the woods.
Fantastic. Well, Pete, I really enjoyed this movie, and it is inspiring. And the statistics are just mind blowing. Again, just what is the reason? Do you think? Before we say goodbye, like what is the major reason that there is such a trend? You rattled through some of the things earlier. It's in the movie, but people are not doing anything. Like everything from you said, like
Yeah.
religion to picnics to clubs to all kinds of
Yeah,
organizations. It's
we we
crazy.
point to we point to maybe a few of the factors that started the phenomenon of the decline of community, the biggest being possibly television, which is that, television came in the 50s and started creating this place where you could put your attention and energy that was outside of your town. And slowly that might have started this process. But one of the things we wanted to emphasize in the movie is there isn't one, culprit to point to. And the best metaphor of thinking about this is what could be called ecosystem collapse. So, you have in natural sciences, like ecosystem collapse is the idea of like you have a rainforest and it has trees and mushrooms and birds and animals and bugs and weather patterns and rivers and things like this. And then you can take away one factor, some major factor, like some pesticide kills off all these bugs, and that means that the birds die. And then the birds were key to the trees, and the trees were big to the river, and the river was big to the pigs, and on and on. And suddenly you wake up in a desert 50 years later. I think civic life is a lot like that too, which is the local newspapers and the civic clubs and the congregations and the culture of democracy and the way we talked about coming together and the practices and skills we built up in these communities. Slowly, one by one, those get unraveled, and in their unraveling, it starts unraveling other things around it too. And you wake up at the end of the day, and we're in the era of bowling alone, and we're seeing all the consequences of that being gone. But what I like about that story is it also points the way to how we rebuild it, which is one civic ecosystem piece at a time. When you revive a local newspaper, when you open up a meeting hall, when you start a club, when you create an annual tradition for your neighborhood, when you learn how to run a meeting, when you tell a story that's a story about people coming together, not people breaking apart. All of that supports each other in the process of reforestation. And that's what we're trying to kick off with this movie. And it's something we can do in all of our Next to the Woods.
Well, I want to highly recommend that everyone see Join or Die. We've been speaking with the director of the film, Pete Davis, the co-director, and you gave the information earlier, but tell us one more time, what's the website that people can go to learn more about your movie?
You can go to joinorddiefilm.com and you can learn more. And right at the top right of joinorddiefilm.com, you can click host a screening. And that's a way to bring it to your neck of the woods.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pete. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for all that you do.
All right. Take
Bye.
it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye.